Over the last few years, various countries around the world have developed their administrative and diplomatic capacities to increase their influence on and maintain communication channels with their diaspora communities. This is pending to the ever-growing important role of the diaspora. Ethiopia is a good witness to this, with the past 2 years of conflict having proven that the diaspora is a force to be reckoned with. The diaspora community can play an important role in the economic growth of their countries of origin. However, beyond their well-established role of senders of remittance and promoters of trade and foreign direct investments, the diaspora can also play an important role in nation building and diplomacy. Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Insights. I am Kirana Baina. In today's episode, we will be looking into diaspora diplomacy. And for the discussion today, I will be joined by the chairman of the Ethiopian American Civil Council, Diacon Yoseph Romanwork Tafari, who will be joining us via Zoom. Do stay with us. Thank you very much for availing yourself and giving us the time for the interview today, Diacon Yoseph. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so I'm going to start with, as you know, like over the past 25 years, the diaspora has been increasingly become a significant player in the international politics. Sort of, there has been a universal reawakening of the role of the diaspora. So before I say any further, I want to start by asking you, what makes the diaspora so important? And, you know, what can we say is their role sort of in the diplomatic arena?
If one looks back from actually looking at from diaspora experience, particularly in North America, what you find is that well before we came to the scene as Ethiopian immigrants to the United States, there is a wide range of other diaspora communities, such as the Koreans, the Cubans, and most famously, the Jewish Americans that have played an unbelievable amount of contribution to their respective country. One note in particular is the experience of the Koreans, the diaspora. They single-handedly rebuilt Korea from the catastrophic war that engulfed that region, in particular Korea itself. One can look at that and look at a model on how the diaspora communities, when they positively engage to their native countries, the impact that they can do. Unfortunately, in our I'm in the category of the generation that have begun the big migration out of Ethiopia during the time of the Derg, and I've been here for over 45 years. And during all that time, and followed with EPDRF rule, essentially the Ethiopian diaspora, by and large, is one of that opposition, including myself. And so we're new in what it means to be positively engaged for the benefit of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian people. But we have many other outside examples that we can look at, find out how we can also contribute, because the bridge between what, you know, once you are for 2 generations locked into protesting and whatnot, it really does take a long time to change that perspective, to ask yourself, whether it's a civic organization at large, but individuals. It's kind of a new experience over the last four years or so. Ethiopians, we're positively engaged in trying to help in many, many fronts.
All right, so actually bringing it to our experience closer to ours, and let me talk about the African Union now. And for a long time, for about like 2 decades or so, the African Union has been engaging the diaspora community because, you know, it's part of the African states' strategy for enhanced growth and development. We know the economic role that is expected from the diaspora, but now talking about the diplomatic discourse and how they could be involved in that, let's talk about the African experience and, like how important is the role of the diaspora in the diplomatic discourse, would you say?
Extremely important. For one, when we talk about diaspora communities, it really attributes to the individual countries that constitutes those diaspora communities. Ethiopian diasporas, Eritrean diasporas, Nigerian diaspora. This is how we are known. However, particularly over the last 2-3 years, one thing that we have done is that we have coalesced together, came together and say, let's have collective voice because, in the scheme of things, when you are particularly in the United States with a nation of 300 million people, we're quite, not that significant number of people who live in the United States to constitute a sounding political capital that we can play. But what we have done is that we sort of came together and start to flex our muscle, and all of a sudden we start getting traction. I did not introduce myself as chairman of the Ethiopian American Civic Council. It's one of the oldest civic organizations that have been around. The last 2 election cycles, we put together a debate, a political debate of candidates, the U.S. candidates, whether it's for the Senate, whether it is for congressional seats. We put together a debate forum. Mm-hmm. That forum, even though the Civic Council is the one that mainly organized it, we made sure that other African members of the community participate and have a hold in an ownership in the staging this. The difference, my friend, is that when we come only as Ethiopian Americans versus diaspora African communities together, the difference is day and night. Okay. That's at least from a constituent point of view, how they view us when we come together onto the table. But the other side is that we are start to echoing, and particularly in the last conflict, this theme called African solution for African challenge. It is taking a tremendous sort of shock, particularly as we walk through the whole of Congress or try to deal with the State Department. Even at some of our efforts in reaching out to the Security Council of the United Nations, that team has really have put them on defensive, which means that if we were to, particularly the African Union, as your question preludes, were to position themselves that we are capable of taking care of our own challenges and problems. For the first time, the European political defense started to get into shell shock and how to deal with it. Because when you talk about Africa, it not only it is a political and geostrategic continent, but there is a racial tinge to it. So when we talk about, unless they challenge us and say, no, you Africans don't know how to handle your own problem, we need to come from Europe or the United States to solve it, which they would not dare to say. I think this is the political capital that Africa as a whole and the African Union should play. And because even with our limited experience, both in dealing with as a constituent political element, or in the case of of when we were dealing with the war situation, and that we've steadfastly said, this is an internal issue, but we said if it goes beyond internal issue, it ought to be an African issue, and that African solutions for African problem should be applied to the situation in Ethiopia. Believe it or not, that we get at least a pause, which is an indication that it is a powerful, powerful tool. African Union can actually develop this. And by the way, even with the peace agreement in Pretoria and whatnot, the fact that the African Union had a bigger hand in it, officially and even internally, I think we're on to dawning into a new international diplomacy, where for the first time in 40 some 50 plus years of the African Union, previously OAU, probably start to get powerful diplomatic traction than it has been in the past. At least that's my take.
All right. So since you raised the idea of, African, the African diaspora kind of presenting itself as one, now I want to go to, the essence of the diplomacy of the diaspora is sort of to enhance and maintain linkage between the members of the diaspora and, citizens at home, and especially encouraging the diaspora to kind of engage in matters of the country, or in this case, we're talking like as Africa, of the continent. So I want to ask now, like the network of the diaspora community, specifically the African diaspora community, how do they use that to build stronger bonds between the countries that that they're from?
Well, what we have found is that there are, even though each country exhibit its own unique challenges, even as a diaspora member, there are many things that makes us have a common denominations, the challenges that we face here in our lives here. African immigrants, our challenge is different than European immigrants. As a result, there is an inherent gravitation that among the diasporas deal what we can do, challenge some of the issues that we face on a daily basis. There is an organization which I was part of when it was founded, and now it's underwritten by several philanthropists, and it's really taking a good traction here in Colorado. The name of the organization is African Leadership Group. And they work with us and they have great members of African communities, and particularly from West Africa, which we are weak relatively. And then you come to our region, we have good relationship with Somalian communities, Sudanese communities, Eritrea, of course, Kenyans. What we've done is basically we merged our influence together. And as I indicated to you earlier, and when we put that debate forum for candidates to come in to hear our concern, we were able to bring members of the other communities, not only just from West Africa and East Africa, but from others, particularly Southern African states, to come to the table. And in these instances, what we are saying is essentially the common issues that we deal with on a daily basis is almost identical. The concern about whether it's healthcare, whether it's education for our children, employment, immigration issues. We're all inundated with immigration issues in the United States that invariably it is bring us together, because it seems like when we come together, we get better results. Now, what this is a process that probably will take decades, if not longer, uh, to bring us collectively, not just on a state level, but on a national stage, as in the entire United States, for example, to form organization that for economic interest, that we can hire lobbyists that would represent our interest, to hire public relation companies that advocate and really reach out to the larger community what our concerns are, to really prepare these debates that here in Colorado we've done it in two election cycle, but on a national stage, including for presidential runs. That the interesting thing is that when you do it in the name of Africa, not just but on the name of a single country, um, many politicians, all of a sudden, their outlook towards you changes. And I saw that clearly because they don't want to be seen in a way, look down on anything that has the name Africa associated to. Like I said earlier, we can understand this is not about just any constituent. It's not about a continent far away in that sense that, United States is obviously is a world power. And so they deal with many other continents, but there is a racial tinge to dealing with Africa. And so they are very careful in any way not to be viewed as someone that they are either show no interest about the concern that comes in the name of Africa. Okay. And this is things that we're seeing it at play. And which means if the African Union continues to develop this collective interest that they can present, not allow themselves to be pushed by either the United States or European Union, okay? I really think, and one example that I want to give you, about 2 years ago, you all know, there was a call for the African permanent membership at the Security Council in the UN. And everybody laughed at it at the beginning. But they're not laughing anymore. Even President Biden commented about it positively. So when he addressed the General Assembly. And so this is what happens. And this is a very exciting time to live, to see that Africa can rise in the world politics, represent itself, not just the diaspora, but as a union itself. And then hopefully, in the near future, that we get to see the world taking Africa very seriously. Okay? And that is, we are, for example, as a diaspora community, even for somebody like myself who have lived for 2.5 generation, we are an early settler compared to other communities from everywhere else in the world. We're late in coming because we were not allowed to come from Africa. And what allowed us was actually the civil rights movement in the 60s that demanded immigration should be open for Africans. Many people don't know that. And I talk about this a lot among our own community to give respect and our allegiance to the African Americans, because without their demand during the civil rights movement, that people who look like them ought to be brought in. We were not part of the immigration quota at all. In fact, historically, the immigration quotas were favored 90% to European immigrants. So in a relative history of what it means to be a diaspora, African, we are probably the youngest diaspora group. Even for somebody as an old man as I am, when I see myself, I've been here for a long time, spend more time here in the United States than I have in my own country. But on a relative scale, we are a very young immigrant community, but we are becoming much more visible, much more vibrant. Now, it doesn't mean that the historically United States never knew about Africans, but they knew us in a different history, the history of slavery. Now we're talking about free Africans immigrating to the United States and developing both economic and political clout and participate in on an everyday life within the country that hosts us. So yeah, that's my thought on that.
All right, thank you. So actually speaking about becoming more visible now to the host countries, let's call them, the past 2 years have been pretty much a very big indication of the power that the diaspora might have in terms of defending the home country or the place of their origin. And now, so I'm slowly bringing us to the case of Ethiopia because I want to talk about the Ethiopian diaspora who have come under international attention in these 2 years of war. But I want to look at, what was the role of the diaspora before the conflict broke out, and where is it at now?
So it's a good thing, and allow me to speak a little bit about the organization that I represent, the Ethiopian American Civic Council. I think many people know about it. We were formed almost 2 days after the Irecha massacre back in 2016. And we just simply said, we're not going to just see such atrocities take place. And what followed is that we supported an individual in Congress, Congressman Mike Kaufman, who represented the district that I live in. And he became the co-author of the House resolution, which is commonly known as HR 128. I went to Congress multiple times to testify. It was the first time in Congress history that a resolution that impacts heavily on an African state in favor of human rights, good governance, okay, even so far to go into penalizing with those who have committed atrocious human rights by inciting the Global Magnitsky Act was ever passed through Congress. And it passed in 2018 when TPLF was facing a big upheaval in Ethiopia, and the two sort of merged together, creating a perfect storm for a very significant political change in Ethiopia. That got noticed by many other Ethiopian groups, and as well as other African diasporas. And what I want to tell you is we were born out of opposing a residing government in Ethiopia, which is under TPLF. And then as soon as the change and the reforms start to take place, we had to make 180 degrees turn to how positively we can engage and to protect the sovereignty of Ethiopia, and also protect Ethiopia from many extremists that are affecting the everyday lives of Ethiopian, and human rights issues and developments also. And guess what followed? What followed was the crisis of GERD. Under Trump, the Egyptians really took us by surprise. You know the crisis. I won't go into it, but we had to come on the front line to defend Ethiopia's sovereign right to develop its natural resources. And then a year after that, the war broke out. Well, that literally was a shock to the system for the diaspora, that one after the other, that we had to come to defend Ethiopia's interest. And finally, as you know, there were a couple of very draconian resolutions that were drafted in Congress. We fought that tooth and nail, and that's why we needed not only with the no more movements and going out on public to display our anger for it, for Congress even to consider that, but also we had to do the fight within the system. Now, a couple of things that I want to bring up, because these are very significant. So, just like the country, Ethiopia, finds itself in fighting a war to protect the national interest and sovereignty of Ethiopia. We were also forced to fight this fight about the misinformation that comes in, possible extremely damaging resolutions that are coming out that will put sanction and embargo on Ethiopia. With the changes that have taken place after the treaty in Pretoria, the game has shifted. Now, we're not, our talking points have changed, our arguments have changed. So the ground, we follow what is taking place right in Ethiopia. And so now we are challenged to develop a new thinking, a new paradigm, and so to speak, and how we advocate for the interests of Ethiopia. So the Civic Council at this moment is seriously considering our focus ought to be on the post-war reconstruction of Ethiopia.
You said that the peace agreement has changed how the diaspora works. And now I'm mentioning this because the diaspora community was a force that many had their eyes on throughout the 2 years of conflict. Now, Twitter was a very popular platform on which, the discourse of the diaspora was put forth. So first, I want to start by asking, what about the peace agreement? Like, what is the diaspora's take on that? We know that the diaspora community has not only been fighting to defend the image of Ethiopia, but also fighting towards reaching some sort of peace. So what is the diaspora's take on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. By and large, we support the peace agreement. It is definitely, the fact, provided that peace comes in a way so that it prevents another conflict or war. That is the kind of peace we want. And one way to look at that is we look at even the history of the United States during the Civil War. That one party won the war, and the loser accepted the loss and surrendered and got disarmed. And the United States never fought another civil war. And we herald that. That is the peace, at least roadmap, that we hope that Ethiopia gets. It should not be a peace that is used as a down payment for another conflict.
So we've talked about the role of the diaspora in terms of buffing off the vilification of Ethiopia, fighting off foreign intervention, fighting off false narratives, and standing up to governments that, quite frankly, don't work in the favor of the people of Ethiopia. So really, my question now is, what is the diaspora's, function is that, besides defending Ethiopia, besides making sure that Ethiopia is not misrepresented, what can the diaspora do on the grounds of nation building and rehabilitation?
Well, we're entering into a very challenging timeline. This is what, by many is an inflection point of history we're in. We're living in a very interesting time. The inflection point is that if we don't pause and say, why are we fighting these wars? Why are these conflicts? How did this come about? Why now? That's why this is an inflection point. Because if you categorically look at the damage that the war has caused, particularly for Tigray, Amhara, and Afar, but and I dare to say to the entire Ethiopia, and take inventory of the collateral damage caused. Somebody need to ask us, how do we avoid this? What lesson do we get out of this conflict? I like to go back to history sometimes and reflect. During the Civil War in the United States, it all began for saving the Union, which is now called United States. Abraham Lincoln had no choice but to fight the fight in order to save the Union. Halfway through the war, after he witnessed the carnage that took place, because the Civil War in the United States took 600,000 lives. After he witnessed that carnage, he said, this can't be just to save the Union. It has to do God's punishment to us for what we have done to our fellow man. Of taking Black people from Africa, enslaved them for 300 years at that point. This is a punishment. We need to remedy that. So the Civil War not only saved the Union, but it ended slavery. We need to do a thinking of that sort because we're living through an inflection point. We need to ask. We fought the fight because to keep the territorial integrity of Ethiopia and its national lu'ulawinnet, what we call what Ethiopia means and what it is. But tell me, that carnage that took place over the last 2 years, did we have accounted for it? Have we taken inventory on it and said, this can't just be about saving Ethiopia. It has to be something that is so inherently flawed in our own system that we need to correct. And that's what Abraham Lincoln did. We need leaders that need to go beyond what is visible and say, never again. Never again. Ethiopia doesn't have any more strength to fight another war like this. Okay? Ethiopia has its own set of enemies out there that, blame the conflicts, but we're giving them the fertile ground for them to do that on us. And if we don't correct this, we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
Going back now, actually, to the diplomatic work that the diaspora, carry out, as you know, one of the roles, or one of the major roles, actually, of any ambassador is to represent his or her country and to represent the image of their country. And we know that the diaspora can also play a part in that. And as you said, the image of Ethiopia has been nothing short of cannibalized throughout the 2 years. So, what's in short words, what's the diaspora doing in terms of rebuilding the image of Ethiopia on the international arena?
Nations deal with other nations based on their own self-interest. And this is no exception, and particularly Ethiopia, a very geopolitically. By the way, all enemies throughout centuries that fought Ethiopia, they fought us because the way God created Ethiopia to where we are, whether it is our rivers or the geopolitical space that we occupy, all of that contributed to our significance or our misery, depending how it turns out. If you take Ethiopia and tuck it into Central Africa, for example, even if they don't like what we do, they would not be as adamant as they have been over the last 2-3 years. That gives you an idea. The other thing is, you look at the whole Horn of Africa and they look at that and they say, if we don't have Ethiopia in our side, we lose the entire region, influence of the region, significance of the region. So now the peace agreement has taken hold, at least begun in good faith. And it turned out the United States has a lot of part in that peace agreement, which the Prime Minister, when he was here, acknowledged that, and he thanked them for it. I believe the Deputy Prime Minister in his tweet indicated that also. At least some of one of the early contacts that we have done since the peace treaty has been signed, they seem to be, everybody's in a good mood. So this is, I don't want to call it a honeymoon period, but it is a time when the United States really, for its own self-interest, be in the good grace side of Ethiopia. They know they really bungled this up. Okay, they admit it. But at the same time, there is a limited window for this to happen. Okay, because we have a very short window. That's what honeymoons are anyway. It's a very brief period that you can make your point across clearly.
Okay, now, so as a conclusion to our conversation, let's have a look at the future that lays ahead and how the Ethiopian diaspora can strengthen its duties to the country. We've looked at the past and the present now, but let's just sort of project now and talk about, possibly in the future, and how the diaspora community will be more engaged in the diplomatic realm in terms of representing Ethiopia, so to speak.
Well, I think what really now, at least the guns have been silent, at least in the Tigray theater, that we really need to pause and say, what is really truly, what's the damage? What are the needs? What is really, what are we end up with? We have people who have been malnourished and women that have been raped. All of these crises, rebuilding process and all of this. Then once you know what you're dealing with, then you go to your homework and say, you know what? Okay, maybe I'll be responsible for advocating for aid we can get in the medical field, or building schools, or the roads that have been destroyed, or basic needs have to be addressed. That's what nation building is. That it's not just the infrastructure, but the human beings that have gone through this trauma, they have to be rebuilt back, reconstructed back to fit into an everyday life. And the diaspora, when we visit Ethiopia, my advice is just don't stay in Addis Ababa only. Go out, go to these affected areas, take notes, and talk to people and find out really the things that can be that you can do, or collectively all we can do. But this thinking have to come around in terms of rebuilding Ethiopia, because we have dug a big hole that it's going to take a long time for us to build ourselves back. In the United States, it took them 20 years to build themselves back from the Civil War. 20 years. And that's the United States. And so I think we have, all of us, if we are willing and if we advocate in a balanced way the interests of Ethiopia, we'll find something that we can do individually and collectively. And that's my thought.
All right, Deacon Yoseph, thank you very much for your time and for your insights today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, dear.
And on that note, we end today's Diplomatic Insights. We've looked into diaspora diplomacy, or the role of the diaspora in the diplomatic realm, as well as in representing Ethiopia, defending the reputation and name of the country, and others as well. I've had an interesting conversation with the chairman of the Ethiopian American Civic Council, Diagon Yoseph Romanwork Tafari. I was Kirana Baina, leading you through the program. Until next time.